Riot, 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 what have you gotten yourselves into? I mean, sure, you may have found success with your MOBA, and your auto battler, and your trading card game, and your K-pop band, and your Netflix original series, and wow, you guys make a lot of stuff. But fighting games are a totally different beast. You're gonna need the help of an expert, and I don't mean to brag, but I'm a blue rank king player in Tekken, so I think I know a thing or two about fighting games. Good morrow everyone, Silvershire here, and welcome to the first-ish episode of Armchair Game Design, where I pretend to know more about making games than the people who make games. Today, I'm going to be pitching my choices for the roster of Project L. I've decided on an initial roster of 24 characters, same as Dragon Ball FighterZ. I figured it was a good comparison to make since both are tag games that were based on existing IPs, but needed to build all of their movesets from scratch, since they're not sequels or crossovers. Out of that 24, 5 have already been confirmed. Ahri, Darius, Echo, Jinx, and Katarina. This seems like a pretty solid roster. Wait, salad roster? Yeah, it's a pretty solid roster. I'm a tomato main, but I'm really looking forward to that crouton DLC. It seems like a pretty solid roster. We've got some rushdowns, some zoners, a big body, and some weird character-specific mechanics to boot. So that leaves us with 19 slots to fill, and with almost 160 champions to choose from, we have plenty of options.
Everybody panic!
The fun thing about building a fighting game out of an existing IP is that you can include the sorts of characters that you wouldn't find in any other fighting game. However, there are also a few League of Legends champions who seem like they were made for a fighting game, and I would be remiss not to include them. The most obvious being Lee Sin. Lee Sin is League's quintessential martial artist, and he would make for a perfect Shoto. I mean, he already has a fireball and a spinning roundhouse kick, so all he needs is an anti-air and an ugly character design and you could drop him straight into Street Fighter V. He would be a well-rounded, fundamentals-based fighter without too many frills or gimmicks. Riot has said that they want Project L to appeal to existing fighting game fans, so it's important to include a character who will make the transition easy, like how Overwatch's Soldier 76 is meant to feel familiar to COD players. However, we also need a good starting character for the newbies, and ironically, I think a good candidate would be one of League's more difficult champions. Riven. Riven is the master of the sword. I imagine that she would play similarly to 2B from Soul Calibur 6 or Noctis from Tekken 7. She would have big, flashy, easily mashable strings to make low-level players feel powerful, but she would be rather predictable and susceptible to punishment from those who know what they're doing. Her Ki Blast ability could be translated into a Get Off Me button like the Burst from Guilty Gear, which would help new players deal with pressure. Of course, I hope that she would also have plenty of depth for those who want to put in the time and effort to master her. If you have any doubts about how sick Riven would be in a fighting game, just look at the Awaken trailer. But maybe her sword isn't quite big enough for you. In that case, allow me to introduce you to Aatrox. Aatrox would translate super well into a fighting game, because he's all about stances. In League, his Deathbringer stance is objectively more powerful than his default stance and locked behind a cooldown, but in Project L, it could come with various advantages and disadvantages so that he could use it whenever. He would be similar to Siegfried and Nightmare from the Soul Calibur series, able to dish out some serious pain at the cost of committing to a stance that limits his options. His ultimate ability, World Ender, would also be a natural fit for Project L, because it's basically an install super that increases the power of his attacks and allows him to fly. But believe it or not, there's one more champion who's even more perfect for a fighting game. Sett. Sett needs to be Project L's grappler. Just look at his abilities. He has face breakers, pile drivers, elbow drops, power slams, and other wrestling things that probably have names. And like any good grappler, he's no slouch with his fists. His Haymaker and his devastating 1-2 punch would be good for conditioning his opponent to block, leaving them vulnerable to a throw. Sett would make a great addition to the roster not only because of his gameplay, but also because of his story. He runs underground, anything-goes pit fights where, quote, fighters from all backgrounds and martial disciplines clash in gruesome duels with a variety of weapons, the winners handsomely paid in Noxian coin. If that's not the setup to a fighting game, I don't know what is. Plus, his title is the boss. I mean, this writes itself. But, as a king main in Tekken 7, you know that I can't leave the roster at just one grappler, so stepping into the ring alongside Sett is Braum. Unlike Sett, Braum's abilities from League don't really lend themselves to a grappler. In fact, they don't really lend themselves to a fighter. Braum is primarily a support character who shields his allies and applies debuffs to enemies. But I think this could actually work in Project L's favor, because it leaves plenty of room for creative freedom. Braum would be bigger and slower than Sett, but he would make up for it with icy projectiles and armored attacks. His supportive, jovial personality would be a nice change of pace from your typical grappler. Also, he has a wrestling outfit, that alone warrants his inclusion in a fighting game. Now that we've covered our bases with the major fighting game archetypes, we can get into some weirder movesets, starting with Azir. Azir? I'm gonna be honest, I've never said most of these names out loud. I'm gonna go with Azir. Azir doesn't like to get his hands dirty, or should I say, sandy. So he summons armies of sand soldiers to do his bidding. There are a couple of ways that this could work in a fighting game. The first would be to make him a classic puppet character, who can summon and directly control sand soldiers with certain inputs, using them primarily for combos and mix-ups. The second would be to make him more like Gargos from Killer Instinct, meaning the sand soldiers would have a very basic AI that harasses the opponent while Azir does whatever he wants. I would prefer the latter, but I think either of these are really cool options. Hey, speaking of Killer Instinct, I was always a fan of Cinder. Wonder if there's anyone like that in League of Legends. Brand? My comparison to Cinder isn't just because they're both fire guys. Let's look at Brand's abilities, shall we? He throws fireballs, shoots pillars of flame up from the ground, triggers explosions, and even has a unique mechanic where he can set enemies on fire to deal damage over time. Sound familiar? In League, the blaze effect stacks up to 3 times before causing an explosion. If this was carried into Project L, it would make him a fun setup character. You wouldn't want to just spam your specials, because then the explosion could happen when you're not in a good position to take advantage of it. But you also wouldn't want to miss out on damage by only triggering 1 or 2 levels of blaze. You would need good strategy and good timing to incorporate the explosion into your combos, which makes for a compelling character. But you know, we can't have all this fire without some ice. Ashe. There are other ice-based characters I could have picked, but let's face it, Ashe is going to be in this game. Prior to Jinx, she was the poster girl for League of Legends, and even still, she's one of its most popular champions. Being an archer, she would obviously have some zoning tendencies, but I think that the Sub-Zero-like ability to freeze opponents would encourage her to close the distance and pull off some melee combos. She's a very nimble and acrobatic sort of character, so I can imagine her doing swift kicks and all sorts of flippy-dippy stuff at close range, and yes, that's official terminology. And with all these ice arrows flying around, you should make sure to dress nice and warm, which this next champion already has covered. Nunu Willem. Between little kids, yordles, and a literal cat, League has a surprising number of tiny champions, and while, spoiler alert, I will be including one of them, I don't want too many of them on the roster, because small hitboxes are just a nuisance in fighting games, I'm looking at you, Yoda, and their character models may not be compatible with throws and whatnot. I'm still looking at you, Yoda. But Nunu doesn't have to worry about this, because he's always on the back of a giant yeti. Like in League, Willem would fight by smacking opponents with his giant paws, causing tremors by smashing the earth beneath him, and occasionally stopping for a quick bite to eat. He would be very slow, but that's where his little human friend comes in. Nunu could throw snowballs that, while weak, would interrupt enemy attacks, helping Willem get away with unsafe moves. We could even take a page out of Mortal Kombat's book and let Willem chuck Nunu at enemies like Ferrator. Man, I love Nunu and Willem, they're just so nice and wholesome. Now for something completely different. Thrash. Thrash looks like a living nightmare, and to zoners that's just what he would be. Between his chain sickle that drags opponents closer and the walls of dark energy he can summon onto the field, fighting Thrash would mean playing by his rules. But none of that's why he's on the roster. He's on the roster because of the Soul Lantern, which imprisons the spirits of his victims. Imagine this. Thrash has a move that sucks an opponent into the Soul Lantern. It doesn't do a lot of damage, in fact, maybe it does no damage, but it forces that character to tag out, and they can't tag back in until their partner deals enough damage to Thrash to break the lantern open. How cool would that be? I'll admit, tag games aren't my forte, but I don't think anything like this has been done before, and it's a really neat idea if I do say so myself. Wow, Thrash is a straight-up villain. Speaking of which, Evelynn. Aside from the zoners, most of the characters we've discussed so far would have a pretty aggressive playstyle, so it's time for someone to focus on defense. Evelynn's general game plan, and even some of her specific attacks, could be similar to those of Ivy from Soul Calibur. She would have a strong keep-away game with an emphasis on whiff punishing. And unlike Ivy, she would be able to teleport away and heal herself, further encouraging a defensive strategy. Evelynn would also fill the oddly specific archetype of a silver-haired femme fatale with a purple outfit that every fighting game apparently needs. Know what else every fighting game needs? A ninja. Akali. There are a few ninjas to choose from in the league, but Akali seems like the obvious choice, both because of her popularity and because her moveset is basically what you would expect out of a fighting game ninja. Like, no offense Shen, but I want to be zipping across the stage with a couple of kunai, not putting up a magical bubble shield. Akali would be all about speed, and while she does have a wide array of throwing weapons, she would primarily be a rushdown character. This would make her pretty similar to fellow speedy knife gal Katarina, but her ninja tools would help set her apart. But maybe all these tricks and traps seem too dishonorable. In that case, I think you'll prefer this next champion. Yasuo. Though not quite as prevalent as ninjas, fighting games love samurai. Some of Yasuo's attacks in League are identical to those of Haomaru from Samurai Showdown, so I'm naturally imagining that they would be similar. Unlike the great swords of Riven, Aatrox, and spoiler alert, one other character on this roster, Yasuo's katana would be nimble and precise. Like Lee Sin, he would be a versatile and well-rounded fighter, but he would be more technical, requiring mastery of timing and complicated inputs. I'm, gonna be honest, I'm kind of running out of transitions now, so, hey look, it's the next guy. Heimerdinger. It wouldn't be League of Legends without a Yordle, and of all the Yordles, I think Heimerdinger has the most unique and interesting moveset. He's an inventor, utilizing a wide array of gizmos and gadgets, like Donatello from Injustice 2 or Dr. B from Tekken. Heimerdinger wouldn't be a great fighter in his own right, but he would have plenty of utility to help out his tag partner. He could set the opponent up for a combo by stunning them with a shot grenade or launching them into the air with a rocket, he could deploy a turret to provide some covering fire, or he could even do some healing with his repair bots. He would be a fun, quirky addition to the roster. That leaves 5 spots on the roster, and I'm going to go through them a little more quickly because I'm not choosing them for their gameplay. These 5 are here because they're popular, they're important to the lore, or I just think they're cool. First up is actually a pair of characters. Caitlyn and Vi. Given the wild success of Arcane, I'll be shocked if its lead characters aren't in Project L. Like Riven, I think they would be good for beginners. Caitlyn would probably be a straightforward zoner, and Vi would probably be a straightforward rushdown, which would make them a good pair. Garen. We can't have Darius in this game without Garen, you don't go splitting up nemesis like that. Gameplay-wise, the two would probably be pretty similar, but Garen could be a little less aggressive and a little more defensive. Kaisa. You know that Riot is going to want to sell a lot of alternate costumes for this game, and when it comes to alternate costumes, nothing sells like KDA. We already have Ahri, Akali, and Evelynn, so all we need is Kaisa to get the whole band together. As far as gameplay goes, I don't know, missiles and stuff? Maybe they could take a bit of creative liberty and give her some symbiotic powers like Venom from Marvel vs. Capcom. That brings us to the final character of my roster, Kiana. Tira is one of my favorite Soul Calibur characters, so there's no way I was leaving Kiana off this roster. She has like elemental powers or something, but I don't care, I just want a ring blade. And with that, I'm gonna leave this video here. Riot, I hope I've helped you decide who to include in Project L, but I'm not the only armchair expert around here, so to all of my lovely viewers, who would you like to see in Project L, and why? That's why, not like the letter Y. Project L is a confusing name. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, I bid thee farewell. Still waiting on that Crouton DLC. Welcome to the first episode of my brand new series, Pellet Swap, where I rank the costumes and character designs of your favorite fighting games. And by your favorite fighting games, I mean my favorite fighting games, and by my favorite fighting games, I mean Soul Calibur. But here we go, Mercy. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jeff Kaplan. I know you're not working on the game.